If you've ever looked at your garage and thought, there is no way I could build anything serious in here, you're not alone. Whether you're working in a corner, a shed, or a shared garage like me, this might help you reimagine what your space can do. I'm going to show you how I built a flexible workshop in half of a garage. I'll walk you through my tools, my layout, and show how I expand into a full space when I need to go big. Welcome to Design Build Workshop. Most of my projects start right here, half of a two-car garage. Welding, woodworking, building custom Jeep interiors, HL scale train layout stuff, all of it happens right here. And today, I'll show you how it all works. This setup isn't perfect, but it works. And most importantly, it keeps me building. If you're working in a small space, let me know in the comments what your biggest challenge is. Here's a montage of a lot of the projects that I've built in this garage shop, including 2 full-size desks and an 8-foot by 4-foot shelf that was all built at the same time. This was during COVID, of course, all built at the same time in this shop. And then all the other projects you can see here were all done in this shop. We'll talk about the front corner of the garage first. I've got my lathe back here, which obviously doesn't move. So this is a benchtop model, an old Craftsman or Atlas. And I have that set right back here, kind of tight in the corner because it doesn't really need any space behind it. The only space it really needs is for the motor mount. So I've got as close as I can to this wall. Other than that, I don't need any other room to operate this other than have this little space right here so I can make this function. The next thing we have back here is I've got my oxyacetylene system that's over here. That's really good right there because I'm trying to make this side more of the metal section. So lathe here, oxyacetylene there, welder is down here, you can kind of see the top of it. And then also underneath here, I have, and I'll do a video on this at some point, this is my forge, my gas forge. And this was just made out of an old, Craftsman toolbox. And it's a really good size for it. So this works out really well. And plus this is movable, so I can just put this back underneath here and put that away. And underneath here I have my grinding discs. And as you can see, there's quite a few of them. So I don't feel like I'm ever gonna have to run out of discs or have to go get discs anytime soon. So we're still in that same corner, but we're just a little further out now. So just on the other side of the lathe, I've got my welding / fixture table set up right here. This is also one of the things that does not move in the shop. So when I was laying everything out, I was making sure that this was in a good spot and I wasn't gonna have to move it later. So this is kind of just enough room so when you swing a car into the garage, the open spot is still clear and you're not gonna hit this table. The next thing over is the drill press, just a simple rigid drill press. I use it for both wood and metal. We've got a little rolling tray here, and I've got a lot of my metalworking tools in here, including my helmet. This used to be hung on the wall. It'll probably go back to the wall, but right now that's where this is. And this is on wheels too, so I can move it around. All of my smaller scrap is in the bottom of this, and so that works out pretty well when I need to grab something quick. It's right there. All the fixtures are in here that work with this table, so that's all here as well, so it's pretty handy. I've got my shear mounted on the table right here. Normally this isn't here. I just have it up here for the video so you can kind of see how everything is mounted. This is screwed in with 1/2-13, and it's the same stuff that this is all drilled and tapped for. So all my fixturing is set up for 1/2-13, so everything I put on this table is also 1/2-13. So when I don't want to have this on here, which I normally don't, I just take the bolts out, put it off on the floor somewhere over there, and then I've got a clear table. The last thing over here is probably my bench vise, and that's anchored the same way. It's got the 1/2-13 bolts that hold it here, so if I do need to have the whole table clear, I can take everything off and still use the table effectively. So now we're a little further down, and we're at the last part of the metal fabricating area. So I've got my anvil here, and then at the end of the table, I've got all my C-clamps and all of my other vice grip clamps that are over here. My metalworking hammers are down on the floor down there. Probably need a better spot for those, but that's where they are right now. And then I've got my rolling tool cabinet here with my drawing table that's on it. And I did a video on that as well before where you saw how that kind of can extend out and down so I can use this when I want to. And obviously I haven't used it in a while, but hopefully I'll get back to it at some point or another. All of my hand tools are pretty much in here, but that's going to transition right now. With the other video you saw with the wall mounted tool cabinet, most of my hand tools are going to go in there, and which will free up this for some other odds and ends, stuff that like the heat gun and stuff like that I really don't have a good place for. And I was really tired of digging through these drawers all the time with some of my bigger tools, and that's why I wanted to kind of build the wall cabinet so that can go on there. This is the first part of the bench work. Well, and of course this is movable as well. So this is all on casters. This cabinet is, so if I need to move it around somewhere or another at some point, I can, but this has been stationary or been here for a long time. This is the first part of the bench work that I put in that was kind of more permanent, and this is actually anchored to the wall. And I think it's about 2 feet deep, and then has an L shape over here, and I'll move the camera again so you can kind of see that. But right here is almost all of my painting stuff, stains, glue, sandpaper. I've got my shop vac down here, and then further over I've got some other things that I'll show you in a second. So as I mentioned before, because this is all in half of a garage, when everything is put away, none of this is accessible. So it's not a usable space unless the car is moved out. And that's how I'm getting away with having the tools that I have, but also having everything on casters so it can perform that, it can do that, it has that ability to move around. So like when everything's put away, the big 5x5 assembly table is all the way, it fills this spot right here. And then I've also got, like my propane tank, which I don't even have in the video right now, but my propane tank, my hand truck, the bandsaw, that's all filling in this area right here. So this isn't accessible either. So the only time I can really get in here to work is when I pull the car out, which I wouldn't want in here anyway when I'm doing woodwork or metal work or whatever, because I'm going to end up screwing up the car. So that's got to come out anyway. So that makes a whole lot of sense as far as it's all packed in here. When there's a car in here, I'm not working in here anyway. And when the car comes out, I can expand and take up that area, and I can really increase my build size. So now we're probably in the most cluttered area of my workshop, and that's this back corner. I'm working on it. Yeah, hopefully I'll get it a little bit better. But the problem is I get going with projects, and then I take stuff down and stuff doesn't go back. And then all of a sudden I've got half projects that are going on that are kind of stored in this area. This ends up being my catch-all area. So I'm really trying to work hard on trying to get this a little more cleaned up and try to come up with some strategies to store a lot of the stuff I have over here. So this, like I mentioned before, this is all the paint and glue and sandpaper, that kind of thing. This back corner is just kind of open, and I've got like scrap wood back here, smaller pieces of scrap. I've got some of the train stuff that I'm doing for the trains, the train layout that I have. And that ends up being in here. That's in all these boxes here is all train stuff. This is a project that's going to turn into something else at some point. I've got cardboard down there. I use cardboard a lot. One of my first videos I talked about how usable cardboard is as a tool, making templates and all that kind of stuff. So I've got a bunch of cardboard down there that I use. I've got some vinyl and some stainless steel screen, which is what this is as well. So this, like I said, this ends up being a catch-all. And then and unfortunately, when you have a flat surface like this, stuff tends to gather on it. This is my little painting booth, also made from scrap, that I use for my airbrush, which I've never broken out. So at some point, I'm going to use my airbrush, but that's what this was built for. And then sewing machine, I picked that up last year or so, and that's for building the top for the Jeep, because I'm going to build a custom top for the Jeep, which I did the first video on, and I really had to stop because of weather, because I had to put the more permanent top on, and I can't work on the new top until that top comes off. So we'll be getting back to that pretty soon. This is my little cabinet that I made out of fence posts and scrap and stuff I had, and this is basically the Lego cabinet. This will probably end up moving because I just don't get into that very often, and because it's taking up real estate that I need, or I find that I need more and more often, that'll probably end up moving. But this little bench work here this is also permanent, of course. This has been handy, except for, like I said, it's been a catch-all. So I need to come up with better utilization for this space. all my wood clamps used to be up here, but because this bench is here and this piece is here, this cabinet, they start to become not so accessible. And so a lot of this stuff, once again, is going to move into the wall cabinet over there. So when the 5x5 table is moved out, this ends up being a really nice, usable, workable space. So I can put in the bandsaw in here. I can put the table saw here. I can do all that kind of stuff because I've got all this room now because everything was kind of moved out in the other part of the garage. So now we're definitely into the area where there's normally a car. So this is the 5x5 assembly table that's on rollers that usually rests in that corner over there where the new benchwork is. And then of course my wall tool cabinet is back there. And at some point I'm going to continue the pallet wood wall across to kind of finish that off. But because this is in this big open spot, I've got plenty of room to work all the way around the table. And because it's on wheels, I can move it a little further forward if I need to be on all four sides of it. This normally resides underneath. So there is a shelf underneath the table. And that goes right here. And then this is my miter box that I use, actually more often recently because I just am liking the less noise. So this is working pretty well for me right here. Sanding disc back here. This is not mounted. It's very heavy, so it doesn't move, very, very far when you're working on it. And if I don't need this up here, it usually goes over somewhere near, where the metal area is in that corner over there. And then of course, I talked about the assembly table at one point in another video, and I've got all of my hardware in this drawer system, which is just a DeWalt, part of the DeWalt system, I guess. But it's just their little cabinet things, and they got these little containers. So if I need something that I need, quite a bunch of, I just pull the little boxes out and put them on the assembly table. But because they're where they are, I can open them up, it'll stay open. And when I don't need it, they all go under. I've got room to expand to one more underneath each one. And that's worked out really well for me because I'm not having to run around trying to find hardware for something that I need while I'm doing my assembly. It's right where I'm doing right where the assembly table is. So that's working out really well. Back there, if you can see it, that's a lot of my wood storage. So some of my larger scrap pieces are back here. Some of it ended up on top of the tool cabinet up there. That's a bunch of walnut up there. But this works extremely well as far as, building and having a nice clear spot. And this is just, I can just take this off. I can just unscrew this and take it off. The reason this is 5x5 is that at some point I want to set up a panel router, and that will mount here. And so 5x5 seems like an odd size, but because I can use a panel router on a 4x4 sheet of plywood, I'll be able to mount the panel router to this table. Now, once I do that, I would like to be able to make it so it's modular so I can take it off. So that's going to take some thinking and reworking and that kind of thing, because I'm still going to need an assembly table somehow. But that's the plan, is that eventually I'll get a panel router and I'll be able to mill a 4x4 piece of sheet. Okay, so one of the last pieces is the table saw, which I use quite often. This is just a contractor saw. It's the Cobalt model, so it's the Lowe's store brand. And then I've got the two folding horses that have been really handy. Probably one of the best things I've ever gotten for as inexpensive as they were. So whenever I'm doing any kind of work, if I need to set up another additional workspace, I just set those out. So then I've got basically the assembly table, I've got the layout table if I need to use it, the fabrication table, and then I've got the horses to put whatever on. So, I can use them for outfeed as far as, using the table saw. The original plan was to kind of make this table the same height as the table saw. That didn't really come together. Maybe at some point I'll change that. But because this is completely movable, I've even got the outside to use if I need to. So I can open the garage door and outfeed out there, or I guess potentially cut out there, which I probably don't do very often because of the noise factor with my neighbors. So I try to keep that down as much as I can. But, because this is all movable, this can pretty much go anywhere as I'm, using it. Okay, bandsaw. So bandsaw normally resides way back in that corner by the garage door, in between the lathe and the assembly table, or I'm sorry, the lathe and the fabrication table. I was looking for a three-wheeler for a long time, and the reason being is a three-wheeler is a pretty small bandsaw, but can still have a really deep throat. So because of that, this works out great for me because I'm in a small shop and this will pretty much handle anything I want to do. I even was working on a car buck, if you're familiar with that is, as far as like doing body work on a car. That's one of the reasons I wanted to have this because, you know, I've got that much, you know, clearance with the throat. So this is, you know, handy. Of course, it just rolls around. The casters are locking. So whenever I do use this, I lock the casters so it's not moving around when I'm trying to cut something. And then when I'm done with it, it just goes back to the corner that it belongs in. Or, you know, if I've got something else going on then there, I just move it somewhere else. This is where big ideas meet tight spaces. Every inch matters here, and every move counts. Lowering a full 4x8 layout in a one-car garage, it's not just possible, it's part of the plan. Okay, so another feature I wanted to cover on the 5x5 table was this open area where the shelf is. So you'll see in the bottom, the shelf actually doesn't start until like 18 inches back from this edge. And that was done on purpose. And the reason being is this was designed to have just enough clearance to go over the top of the anvil. And all I was trying to do was consolidate a little more space so I could get this right up against my fab table. And then I'd have that open spot. And the idea was that I could still work in that corner. The drawer system is actually accessible on that side. So I could still use this and, you know, not have to invade the other part of the garage just in case, say it's winter and we don't want the car out. I could still work in here on some smaller projects and still have access to the open side. All right, I'm going to show you how this can go over the top of the anvil. Now, because the anvil's pretty wide, it's got to go in at an angle, which makes it a little more difficult. And like I said, it barely clears. So I have to be really careful. And what I'm going to do at some point is I'm going to get a taller set of casters. And that's because the casters that are on here really aren't made for the weight that this carries. So, you know, that will change at some point. All right, now once I clear the one horn, I can back the table up. And then I can clear the other horn. And then I can park the table just like that. And like I said, what that does, that allows me access to the drawers. If this stuff wasn't here, I'd have access to the cabinet in these drawers. I can still get into my tool chest and get to my tools in here. And so that way I can still work on this even with another car, even when the car is in the garage. Thanks again for joining me on Design Build Workshop and this video on building big things in small spaces. Please like and subscribe, I would really appreciate it, and I hope to see you next time.